Hey everyone, welcome back to the Sports Psych Show. Thanks so much for joining me. Today I'm joined by coach and academic Ben Franks. Ben, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Dan.
Oh, it's been some time in terms of trying to get you on. Looking forward to having this conversation, and we're going to be talking about all things ecological dynamics today. I'm super excited because this is an area I have an interesting relationship with, as Ben well knows. He's smiling there because it's an area that I've been really keen on at times, and at other times I've had question marks over. And but you know what? It's so important for me. This is a learning experience. I'm so excited to have Ben on, who's one of the best and biggest voices in this area and is using this framework in his coaching. So we're going to break this down and make this super simple. But before we get on to that, tell us about yourself. Tell us about your work. What's going on in your world?
Oh, best and biggest is
bigging you up there.
Yeah, my name is Ben Franks. I'm a senior lecturer in, what is my job title? Applied Coaching Sciences at Oxford Brookes. I'm not really sure what that job title means. I talk a lot about coaching, I guess. And then outside of that, I kind of consult and coach across a variety of different kind of places and organisations. But I guess the meat in my external work is in working with Sevenoaks Town in the Isthmian League South East, which has been the main area of my coaching in the last kind of season or so. And I guess the place where ecological dynamics has come to life, if we're going to frame it there.
Brilliant. So we've got an applied setting to bring this to life. And sorry, I was kind of half interjecting there because, having worked in soccer, football in England for the past 20 years, I'm well acquainted with the Isthmian League, and it's a really, really high level in soccer in England. But for those who don't know that level, what is Isthmian step 7?
I don't know. I don't know. Tier 4.
Tier 4, step 7, so step 8, something like that.
We're a fair few promotions away from
Premier League. You need a superstar Hollywood actor or actors to come along and purchase Sevenoaks.
Yeah, if any of them are listening.
I know the Isthmian League well, Ben, and it is a really, really good. It's a really good level. So you're coaching up at a great level there. Football, soccer, your sport?
Yep. Classic. Injury prone. Never made it as a pro. Nah, I was terrible. I was a goalkeeper. I was a goalkeeper that could play with his feet before his time.
Nice.
I wasn't as good as keeping the ball out the goal, but but no, I retired from playing quite young, partly because of just lots and lots of irritating injuries. But I just kind of lost the love of playing and saw myself much more as a coach. And that's kind of been a turmoil. I'll plug a paper we published recently, but it's kind of been a turmoil I've wrestled with for the past kind of decade, is this space between being a coach, being an ex kind of player, being an academic, and trying to kind of bridge those boundaries. So I think this is where I'm going to try and lean on this conversation as we go. It's that kind of liminal space that I kind of exist in between the universities and coaching, and trying to do a bit of both and doing both quite badly, I think, at times.
I'm sure that's not true. It's interesting. It's almost like a fairly, please excuse this using the word negative, but it almost feels like quite a negative lens. I mean, I've always felt that people who are in academia, who are lecturing and or have returned back to some kind of academic study, and they are coaches, I've always felt that they're in quite a strong position to be able to bolster their coaching. But it sounds to me like you find that position quite a challenging one, Ben.
Yeah, I've always seen it as I'll never be a proper academic, because I'll never be the super kind of always publishing, brilliant research type, because I want to spend time in coaching. But on the same hat, I'll never be a proper kind of performance coach, because I'll always be part-time. I'll always be at step 4, tier 7. I'll always be on the periphery, because I know that a life in coaching is not always particularly glamorous, and it's not the most stable kind of industry in the world. And so yeah, I've always found myself between those two things, wanting to be more of one than the other, kind of changing and flipping every 6 months.
Sounds like we need to get the therapeutic chaise long out and have a conversation after this recording. Well, as you've mentioned there, you're a lecturer, you're in academia, you're doing good research, you're a coach as well. And as I mentioned earlier, we're here to talk about ecological dynamics. We actually met for the first time, didn't we, in Ireland? Was it 2019 at a conference skill acquisition conference, where I think ecological dynamics was probably at the heart. It wasn't the only thing, but at the heart of things. And it was a time I was certainly starting to learn about this underpinning theory of skill acquisition, and it's built and it's grown and it features in lots of debates. And historically, I've been in some of those debates, and sometimes those debates have been really useful for me to really think about, how the brain might work, and how our behaviors, why are we doing what we're doing, and how people might develop skill. And I've had a bit of by my own admission, not a love-hate, but a liking and a disliking of the area. But I have absolute full respect for anybody who dives in deep into it and uses ecological dynamics as a framework to underpin their coaching, underpin their lens of the world and their coaching world. So let's try to dive a bit deeper. And we spoke off air prior to this, and I said I'm really, really keen to strip things back, because when we start talking about ecological dynamics, people can run a mile, because it sounds quite complicated, it sounds quite complex, and I want to strip things back and make things as simple as we possibly can, but no simpler, right? Because sometimes things have to be looked at through a complex lens. So let's break this down. These two words, ecological and dynamics. What is the ecological? What is the dynamics? And then we can kind of get on to where this fits in with sport and sports coaching.
Yes, I guess broadly speaking, ecological dynamics is a theoretical framework that was captured, I guess, the mid to late 90s, early 2000s by people like Keith Davids, Ian Renshaw, Greg Hanford, etc. And it's essentially the coupling of the field of ecological psychology, which is very much a field around kind of perception action coupling, and I'll park this, but like looking at perception action cognition from a non-representational view. So i.e. there's no need for representations or kind of some sort of inferential processes. Perception is direct, i.e. the things that we can, I'm focused on visual perception, the things I can basically see, I'm sensitive to. They can govern my behavior kind of directly. It doesn't need to be treated. It's kind of rich enough in itself.
Yep.
The dynamic side comes from the field of dynamic systems and kind of complex systems theories, where we are basically viewing humans and other animals and social groups or teams as these neurobiologically complex systems, which are, they are open systems. So they are kind of can be disturbed, they fluctuate, they're transitional, they are shaped by kind of the constraints of the world that are imposed on them. So if you think of like traffic, for example, it's a complex system. There's no one single kind of homunculi-esque controller. It's lots of kind of dynamic patterns and flows that organizes behavior. And the term which I'm a bit funny with is it's kind of self-organization, and that's just the constraints that cause these governing behaviors, which is captured around like these self-organizing capacities that complex systems have. So then those two, I guess, areas are married together to form ecological dynamics, which is essentially a theoretical framework that can support the understanding of how skilled behavior happens in sport, both individually and kind of teams.
I'm going to try and reflect back what I heard in my simplest possible form. When you simplify things, you butcher things, right? So let's try and piece through this. The ecological side comes from ecological psychology, and what that in stunningly simple terms suggests is that we don't really have a model of our world in our head, right? That everything that we're looking at right now, so everybody listening in, what you're seeing out there, you don't hold a model in your head of what you're seeing. That all the information that you see in your environment is just there, and it's available for you, the perceptual system. That's how I'm, again, stunningly simplistic viewpoint of ecological psychology. I know there's so much more to it. And then dynamic systems being that what is out there, what you are seeing is complex. So the behaviors that you're seeing amongst people, and in our case in sport, often forming teams, and all the movements that we see is complex. And you use that term self-organization. So a lot of the way that those behaviors play out is as a consequence of self-organization, and sort of happening as a consequence of behaviors interacting, essentially. Am I kind of getting both half there?
Yeah, I think so. The primary assumption rests on this notion of like organism environment mutuality, which essentially means you can't separate the me from the world that I exist in. It's not like a separate thing. It's like an inseparable whole. I can't exist without reference to the environment I'm in, and the environment doesn't exist without reference to the me part of it. Kind of, it's that the constant need for both is what governs behaviors.
Yeah. So I'm moving through my world, and my world is constantly influencing me based on what I'm seeing.
Yeah, it's in a super meta way. Is it? Am I am part of the world essentially. I am the world basically.
I am the world. I don't have a model of the world in my head. The model of the world is the world.
Yes, yeah, exactly that.
Okay. Right, there we go. We can finish there. That was really highbrow. that used up all the sugars and glucose in my frontal lobe there. So why sport? What? Okay, ecological psychology, dynamical systems. We're throwing those together. Work stemming from the great Keith Davids back in the 90s, Ian Renshaw, great people doing great work. So they've brought this into sport. So what has this got to do with sport and sports coaching?
I guess it can be quite a powerful tool to explain why skilled behaviour happens.
Okay.
There is lots that we don't really know about how skilled behaviour takes place. A lot of it has been predicated on this more neurocentric, kind of more, I guess, more mainstream perspectives on cognition, like information processing, or more recently things like predictive processing, etc.
Can you break down information processing for me? Because isn't that counter to ecological dynamics? Would that be a fair thing to say?
Yeah, I guess the history of it, I guess ecological psychology, which is probably what I consider myself more as than a dynamic systems theorist, because I can't do the maths. But from an ecological point of view, it kind of was born out of a similar-ish domain to behaviorism in like earlier 1900s. Information processing was a big challenge against behaviorism because kind of traditional behaviorists were like, we don't really care about what happens inside. We're just interested about the behavior. I think that Pavlov's dog, black box stuff.
Yeah.
Information processing tried to essentially model the stuff that happens inside the brain. And then you see the birth of things like the computer analogy and the fact that the brain is a processor, and there are some computational type things that happen which kind of emerged through the 50s, 60s. And then more towards today, where the brain is a bit more I'm not going to try and explain why the brain's Bayesian. The brain is a prediction machine, essentially. It can predict future states based on the model that it generates in the mind. And that's kind of a big detachment from the ecological dynamics approach, because, again, as we kind of addressed earlier, we don't see the need for the model because the world is the model and we're connected with it.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. So I'm sorry, I interjected there. You were eloquently talking about ecological dynamics and its relationship with sport, and you were talking about developing skill essentially. So continue for us there, broaden this for us. So, ecological dynamics, building skill. How comes this is useful?
Yeah, I guess it came more to prominence, I guess, as we've seen a shift in like pedagogical type behaviors. Like coaching practice has changed over the last 3-4 decades. It's become less of the very, very old school military type drilling when that's the purpose physical education served.
Okay.
And sport coaching practice became slightly more about, we saw the game-based approaches wave happen towards the end of the noughties, the early 2010s.
Yep.
And I think ecological dynamics, it provided an alternate language to explain why some of this quite cool stuff happens. The very best athletes do really cool, spontaneous, creative, adaptable, flexible type behaviors, which traditional models of cognition and perception action didn't necessarily account for as well. So ecological dynamics provided a set of terminology, a set of frameworks and tools that helped explain how athletes find these really interesting functional solutions to sporting contexts. And I guess as a part of that is thinking about how do we create more of these athletes that are creative, flexible, adaptable. Ecological dynamics kind of came with this set of assumptions around what training design could look like from this ecological approach, where we see the organism and its environment as one indivisible kind of total, as coupling. So therefore, if we're thinking about practice design, well, maybe the environment we create is important for the person we put in it. And if the environment's important, then maybe we should think about what sort of stuff we design into it. So, we've gone from, and I know I would caveat this with the whole kind of isolated practice and drills versus games is just a bit of a not really a thing. I don't think anyone truly just does military-esque 1920s drilling, and no one does 11v11 every single day of the week. So
yes,
but I think there is, in fact, no, ecological dynamics comes with the assumptions that training design should be more variable. It should be more representative of the performance environments based upon some of the theoretical tenets that underpin it around perception action coupling, for example.
A term I have in my mind here because you've used that term representation. So again, if we can evoke this image of all of us as human beings, and if we think about us in a sporting environment, moving through our sporting world, so like we're out on the pitch, for example, if we're talking about football, soccer, but we could be thinking about basketball being in the gym or baseball being on the field. We're moving through our environment here, and maybe we're engaging in a practice session, whatever that is. And because ecological psychology very much emphasizes this relationship between person and environment, and there's nothing necessarily there's not a model of the world in the mind of the player, the person, us, right? And all the information is in the environment. Thus, what you're saying is so vital for an ecological dynamicist is we have to make that session design, that practice, as representative as possible to the information in the actual game. That's the term I'm thinking of is representative learning design. Is that correct?
Yeah, and I guess another small caveat is I'm coming at this from a real motor skill acquisition angle. So when I use like the term coaching here,
yes,
I'm coming from a really heavily motor skill perspective, not coaching as the breadth of it.
Of course.
And so that's where I see it. Yeah, it making sense is with notions of representative learning design, which doesn't mean just play the game all the time.
Okay.
It means consider what elements of the performance environment we do represent. So we're doing some really, really cool work at the moment with a guy called Dan Tumulty-Bevan and Ant White, two wicked goalkeeper coaches. And we're doing it with...
I know Ant well, yes.
Yeah, of course. That's how we met.
Yes.
And we're looking at their basically practice designing goalkeeping.
Yeah.
Right through the entire spectrum of the volleying from 7 yards out, and it's fully announced. The goalkeeper knows what type of serve they're going to get, for example, all the way up to multiple goals, moving defenders and attackers, really live type game like activity, and trying to capture what are the information sources, what are the things they're looking at, what is it that's regulating their behavior in all these different environments. Because if we want learning to transfer, the evidence tells us that near transfer tends to happen.
Define near transfer for me.
As in the proximity of the training design and the performance environment are quite close. And obviously, the further away we go from the performance environment, the less likely transfer is to happen. That's a general assumption of the research that we know of. Now, we get good at doing the tasks we do. So if I do lots of, which I did as a goalkeeper growing up, I did lots of saving volleys from 10 yards out, and my handling was slick. And my coach would say lots of things like, yeah, good hands, yeah, lovely, good form, good shapes. That was always my favourite, good shape. But we're starting to question from a motor skill perspective, does that incorporate the necessary information that will help me transfer that into a performance? Now, there's lots of other related things which support transfer in terms of things like psychological safety or kind of finding that rhythm, confidence. Those types of things obviously are part of it as well. But from a purely motor skill learning perspective, we want to start challenging some of those assumptions that are really culturally sticky in goalkeeping. And actually in more live type practices, goalkeepers do lots more. They do a lot more of like preparing to save type behaviors before the actual saving bit, which is really important for goalkeeping because the game is kind of predicated on those fine moments where you basically need to be in the right place at the right time to ensure you can make a save.
Yeah.
And we don't tend to get a lot of that when you isolate those variables down to very few and focus just on the shape of the save, for example. So representative learning design would, it comes with the assumption that the more representative the training design is, the more likely that is to transfer. And the nuance of representative learning design is designing in information sources that goalkeepers would utilize it in games. Doesn't mean play the game all the time. It means designing the things that they're going to need in the game, which means we can then maybe start to tailor what that environment looks like. It can't always be live. It can't always be at the bottom end, but it's not as simple as just play a game all the time because there's lots of other consideration type stuff.
Some of the things I'm hearing that I want to reflect back to you. So it's representative learning design is keeping those information sources that you have in the game, taking those into training as often as you can, and I suppose a relevant, and please excuse me if I'm getting this wrong, but a relevant comparison would be we had Professor Nicky Hodges and Professor Keith Lowes coming on, and not obviously using an ecological dynamics underpinning here, but challenge point, and they talk about high specificity, and you in ecological dynamics you talk about representative, and you don't want to decouple the information sources. So what I'm hearing here is that, and if we hone in on you as a goalkeeper coach, and we hone in on goalkeeping in the world of soccer, football, if you are engaged in an activity that is what you might call announced, you've got announced and unannounced. I remember this from working with Ant, who sort of talked a lot about this, and announced being those very, what you might describe as vanilla form, as you say, bit of handling and somebody's volleying it into your hands. But you're not seeing any informational cues from the people in front of you or the person in front of you. So you're just making a save without having to read or recognize patterns in the game, right? So you're decoupling yourself from the actual game. Decoupling might be the wrong term, but we'll come back to you and you can correct me. Whereas when we've got unannounced, that's when there might be some form of game or movement in front of you, and you have to your skill is then predicated on the informational cues in that environment, and then you've still got to execute your skills, your actions as well. Am I sort of hearing things correctly? That's really the importance of a representative learning design, is to make sure you've got those informational cues in your environment.
Yeah, exactly that. And kind of announced, unannounced live stuff is a really nice way of demonstrating that. And when I was with Dan the other week, kind of going through these different practice designs with his goalkeepers, like he's kind of catching my eye during the session when he's doing the announced stuff, and he's saying like goalkeeper's almost trying to cheat. He knows where the ball is going. He's trying to get that big step out of the diving action really early, almost trying to collapse. And the timing goes all wrong and all kind of out of shape, and the save is then a bit clumsy. And this, the easiest one to change is, go from volleys to just strike the ball itself, then move on to a moving ball. In some research I did a few years ago, looked at essentially the difference between static ball versus striking a moving ball.
Okay.
You got a whole difference in how goalkeepers are using their visual search behaviors, i.e., how they're trying to pick up the information visually. When they're against a striking ball, they're just very dependent. When against a static ball, they're just very dependent on the ball itself. They're almost like in this state of waiting and have to then suddenly react. Whereas when the ball is moving, you see these more exploratory type visual fixations where they're trying to scan around the ball, the knee, the hip. They're picking up these kinematic cues as well that informs their saving action. So there's really clear perceptual differences in how they save the ball. So we've got to be really mindful of the type of information we design in, because that it leads to behavior in some way. And this comes back to this framing of humans, athletes, as these complex neurobiological systems. In fact, that their behavior changes based on the information flows presented to them. So if we are designing something into our training designs which causes a change in behavior, we've got to be really mindful of, is that change in behavior the thing we really want? The example I always see is, if we want to develop, attacking wide areas, for example. So we'll put some wide channels in and a couple of goals at the top of the wide channels, because then we're looking to score wide. So our attacking play is always going to go wide to the line. But the defensive team then just recognise that and they just defend the wide areas. So actually the space is actually in the middle of the pitch to exploit. So we've kind of got this co-adaptive behaviour, these interactions within the world, where we're not actually getting the thing we want anymore, because the information flows that we thought one team needed has actually shaped the other team without us realizing it. And that, I guess, is that self-organizing principle, is that behavior can emerge through these interactions in the environment, irrespective of what we want, because of this kind of non-linearity and complexity in behavior that we see humans and animals exhibit.
That's a really interesting point you've made. So let me throw you my interpretation of what you just said there. Rule number one here for an ecological dynamicist is essentially to keep the activities as representative as possible. You're not suggesting there's never a time for low representation, but you are suggesting the higher representation that there is. So the informational sources in your practice activities are as close to the game as possible, the more chance there is of transference. And within these practice sessions, whereby there's high representation, human beings are self-organizing, they're self-organizing movement. So would it be true and fair to say, therefore, that human beings, your players, for example, are developing the appropriate skill as they experience your representative learning design as they're going through the session, they're engaging in the practice, and they are executing their skills in a manner that is optimal for them based on your design. Is that correct?
Yeah, it rings with a previous guest of yours, that Danny Newcomb. He
Yes.
kind of coined this notion of constraining to afford,
Okay.
where we'll put constraints, i.e., we'll put kind of certain rules or parameters on our practice design to deliberately afford a behaviour I want. Essentially, the athletes in that environment will then be encouraged to pick up on the information that I want them to see. So, if I want my players to be much better at attacking in behind, so trying to use kind of vertical space behind the opposition backline, for example, well, I need to make sure that my pitch exaggerates the length, so they're afforded lots of opportunities to run in beyond. There's no point me having like a normal box with kind of no real direction, because they're not being encouraged to behave in a certain way. Whereas if I make sure that I have kind of a single direction goal, which is on a really long pitch, but it's quite narrow, so we can't recycle the ball loads. We have to look for opportunities to play forward. We're going to get lots of replication of those types of scenarios. So my striker should spend the next 15 minutes of the session looking for those bits of information that will support him in thinking or having the intention to run in beyond or kind of exploit space beyond the back line. Doesn't mean that as a coach, I just stand back saying, "Oh, yeah, lovely, I've solved coaching. It's me in Premier. Here we go." There's still some coaching stuff that's needed, but in theory, yes, it's that deliberate design of the environment that encourages certain ways of behaving should lead to my players picking up on information which is most salient or most relevant in those particular scenarios or moments.
Now, as a sports psychologist, I'm considering this idea of picking up on that information, that salient information, and then they organize themselves in terms of how they're going to solve a a movement solution, a movement challenge, excuse me, in that moment. But I'm thinking as a sports psychologist, how am I picking up on that information? Well, I'm focusing on it. I'm paying attention to it. So what I'm thinking here as a sports psych is, again, if I'm putting myself in the world of an ecological dynamicist, I'm in the example that you've just given to us, I'm changing the environment. You want more balls in over the top. So what you're doing, and please excuse me, I'm not, I'll try and get this as correct as I can. You're changing the width of the pitch, and it's kind of inviting a little bit more vertical play, right? That's what I'm hearing you. So you're through your session design, you're essentially cultivating a certain focus of attention, a certain direction of attention from the player. So please come back at me if I'm correct or I'm getting that wrong. So your session design is driving attention. And I'm guessing, because you said, well, as a coach, I don't just stand back and go, I've solved coaching here. You're getting involved. Are you getting involved with directing attention here? Is that what you're doing as a coach?
Yeah. I'd probably use the word intention. So
Gotcha.
my intentions in practice design needs to match my intentions in my game model, which needs to match my players' intentions to kind of create that. So something I've always debated a lot over the course of the year is, how much do I bring players into that conversation in terms of my practice design? How much do they need to know about why I'm designing the things I'm designing the way that I am, to the point where I think this pre-season will probably put the practice sessions up on the wall in the changing room before they go out, because if I want them to all be matched with my intentions, they need to know what I'm intending to do. Both from that striker who's trying to go in beyond, but also then my back four who are recognising, or Ben's trying to stitch us up tonight by by trying to get us beat over the top every time. So they might then have to start dropping their line a little bit. They might become quite cute and quite wise to it. So there's this kind of co-adaptation going on, which is sport, right? That's the complexity of the performance environment that we maybe start to get, where we've got players who are thinking and exchanging ideas, and their intentions are changing over the course of the session. And I'm using the language of ecological dynamics here, but a point I really want to stress is like this, that practice design, that's not ecological dynamics. That's just coaching craft that you see lots of people do day to day. They just have different ways of explaining it and phrasing it.
Yes. Yeah.
I use the notion of ecological dynamics to rationalize why I'm doing these things. But I spoke to lots of coaches who rationalize their practice the exact same way I've just done, just with different words. And we teach a module at Brookes in that same way. So myself and Matt Fiander, who addresses it from a more psych-esque perspective. We basically end up coaching very similar. We both quite like game-based approaches. We both like some kind of big picture phase of play type stuff. Neither of us really like to go down too isolated, for theoretical justification reasons, and also just personal preference. It bores the life out of me doing drills, because
Yeah.
that's how I was coached a lot when I was younger, and it bored the life out of me then. I was a nightmare to coach. But as a coach, I don't like delivering it because it bores me. So I'm not saying it's wrong. Ecological dynamics also doesn't say that doing drills is wrong.
Okay.
The assumptions nudge us to more variable, more representative.
Yeah.
But the key is in that kind of performer environment relations, and if there is a reason that those relations can be supported by going really far down that spectrum towards like quite repetitive drill based stuff, then that's absolutely fine. A couple of seasons ago, did it with a young striker. We had a 16-year-old striker who was in senior women's football, was our top goal scorer, but she was getting hit a lot in training because she was small and slight. So we'd take her out the firing line. We'd give her lots of isolated type practice, because her job for me was to stay out of the way as much as you can in the game and just pop up and just make sure the ball goes in the bottom corner. So we did lots of isolated type practice stuff with her, because probably what she needed at that moment. Theoretically, from a motor skill perspective, I didn't love it, but my intentions weren't around motor skill transfer. My intentions around supporting her needs, whereas my intentions in the previous example was around, solving game problems, solving kind of tactical stuff in the moment. So it requires me to be more up towards this end.
Intention, not attention, or intention driving attention?
Yeah, probably the latter. Yeah.
Okay.
So I like the notion of like intentionality is quite commonplace in ecological dynamics, and I guess more towards the ecological psychology side with like the skilled intentionality stuff.
Gotcha.
Essentially, which is kind of the premise of my PhD, is looking beyond motor skill acquisition as like this very small event of just doing the skill, but incorporating all of like the temporal, cultural, social constraints that also affect performance itself. So I'm looking at cricket batting as like the main task domain with my PhD.
Okay.
And lots of the research so far has looked at it from like a trial by trial perspective, i.e. bowler bowls, batter bats, done. Bowler bowls, batter bats, done. Whereas I'm trying to look at that, well, cricket's a really big temporal event. I mean, Zach Crawley today has been batting for the best part of 6 hours, 5
Yeah,
hours.
I saw that. Yeah.
So the ball one is different to ball 60, is different to the ball that gets him his century, is different to the ball he gets after he just got one in the hip.
Mm.
His intentions are always shaping his ability to perceive and act in sport. So I'm going in a roundabout way to practice design, but bear with me. So it's if those intentions are like really temporal, i.e. every single time I bat, the next ball is linked and the ball after that is linked, and if the run rate drops, that shapes my intentions. All of these things is just information. So I've
Yeah.
spoken a lot around visual information, but information is much more broad. It's both contextual and sensory. And all of these things are so important for in the moment in performance. But then often we train without these things considered. So the go to thing in cricket, it's a mad sport where you can't actually train properly for 7 months of the year, 8 months of the year because
Yeah.
of the weather in England.
Yeah.
So you go indoors, but you can't always have people bowling at you because people have shoulders that will disintegrate if they're bowling, 10, 20, 30 overs a day. So we need to use bowling machines. So we have a bowling machine, we have a hard ground net session, and we'll just fire balls in at batters over and over and over again with no consequence, with not always much kind of intention behind what's going on. And just essentially trying to challenge, like, okay, the constraints mean that we can't do super representative practice. So what representative information can we draw in to these net sessions? Can we have a natural consequence if they get out? Can they be out? There's a purpose for them kind of keeping your wicket intact. Can we add scenarios? Can we be more purposeful with how we set the bowling machine up rather than sticking it on 75, firing in on half a length and just letting me have a nice time? I'm really good batting against bowling machines. I'm phenomenal. My average for the last 4 summers is like single figures because I can't bat with any flexibility or adaptability
Yeah.
because I train 3 times a year against the bowling machine in a sports hall.
Yeah.
So I learned the dynamics of that environment.
Yeah.
I become very coupled. I pick up the information in that environment. I become very sensitive to that kind of information. But then that doesn't necessarily correspond with the practice environment in the same way as, like, I don't practice under any kind of intentions. I just kind of practice to go out and have a hit. Admittedly, that is also my style as a batter in games. But for better quality cricketers, they will have intentions, whether they're anchoring in innings, whether they're in a run chase, whether they're just trying to settle things down a little bit, time of day, weather, the wicket decaying. All of these things are such vital information sources, and it kind of stems from all of Ollie Runswick stuff, who you've had on as a guest before, and all of the really cool stuff about, like, contextual information. It's something we've often forgot about in practice environments. Even something as silly as having a scoreboard live on the side of the pitch during training. If you're doing a practice game, have a scoreboard in play with a clock. It changes intentions, and intentions shape what we perceive and how we act in games. So let's bring that information source into training environments, because it's that intentionality that drives skilled behavior.
I couldn't agree more, and so much you said there, Ben, resonates with me so much, and stuff that I'm engaged in my day-to-day conversations with coaches. I wouldn't necessarily utilize the same language as you do, because I'm not necessarily using an ecological dynamical framework to underpin what I'm saying. But for example, I mean, if you might, everything that you're talking about relates to, say, intrinsic dynamics. I think that's
Yeah.
what the term you might use, intrinsic dynamics, which is everything that you're experiencing inside of you with relation to what's happening, the meaning of what's going on. I think meaning is again, that might be quite cognitive, so it might be slightly different to where you're coming from, but the meaning of what's going, the meaning of the scoreboard, the meaning of how long there is to go, the meaning of that ball that has just hit my hip, and you're talking about it from the perspective of your intrinsic dynamics impacting your intentionality, and and it's captured, again, probably a slightly different theoretical framework, maybe a bit more predictive processing, where you might talk about exteroceptive data coming, sensorial data coming from outside of you into you, and then interoceptive data, which is your intrinsic dynamics, which is data coming from your body to your brain, and then obviously proprioceptive data. But I think all these things are in play at any given time, and I completely agree. I mean, this is my experience of 20 years as a sports psych, and then previously as a coach and a competitor, but very much as a sports psych, is that the intentionality, or the attention, as I might say, is shaped and diverted onto these things away from what might be optimal, what might be useful. I focus on the scoreboard when I shouldn't be. I focus on how long there is to go when I shouldn't be. I am a big believer in what you're saying. And as you said, I mean, we've had Ollie on the show, Ollie Runswick on the show, talking about, we might use the term contextual priors and training in these conditions to help players build their capacity to shape their intention, irrespective of what's going on around them, and to be able to shape the intention so they'd probably focus on specific things during the game. So no question, mate, but just throwing straight back at you, I completely agree.
I think this is probably the hill I wanted to come and die on as part of this, is as I've grown and mellowed and come off Twitter. I think
X now, X. You're so old school.
That's how long I've been off it for. But whether I'm ecological or someone else is cognitive, a lot of us are talking about the same practical type craft.
Yeah.
And there is some fundamental philosophical differences. I fundamentally believe that perception, action, cognition is non-representational, and that it's predicated on direct perception of affordances. But for any of the coaches that I work with, I don't think it doesn't matter, because it's not concrete. It's not the reality of coaching.
Yes.
When Matt and I run that module, we dual run it from our different paradigms. A lot of the coaching looks similar, because good coaching is good coaching. And the theoretical framework as a language and as a set of principles has really helped. Ecological dynamics as a theoretical framework has really helped me establish a language to help rationalize why I'm doing the things that I'm doing. But also I've been blessed with the time to spend a long time reading and learning about this stuff. And my coaching philosophy has been built around these notions of representative design, constraining to afford, repetition without repetition, functional variability, all of these kind of pillars of the ecological approach I've built my philosophy on. But if I go and catch up with a mate of mine who coaches down the road, his coaching philosophy is built on lots of the same assumptions, that maybe doesn't have like the empirical knowledge of whether or not it works in a strict laboratory motor learning capacity. But he's got an experiential philosophy where he has seen in practice that stuff that he does that feels and looks like the game works well, that lots of variability is helping his players be more adaptable in the moment, that getting lots of repetition of events rather than techniques is giving players opportunities to solve problems as well as refine skill. It's different terminology, but it's no less valid as a framework. And I think this is where ecological dynamics now has arrived at this space where it's brilliant that it informs lots of ways that people are thinking about coaching and influences various coach development and coach education spaces. But the stuff that really matters for the coaches is the stuff that really matters for the coaches, and that can be predicated on ecological dynamics, more predictive processing, like the challenge point framework, for example. Like specificity exists in both theoretical frameworks.
Yeah.
essentially. So I just want to have a bit of a shout and a rant, actually.
I love it.
I just think, yeah, the underpinning theoretical assumptions are important for a couple of chapters in my PhD and the various research papers that kind of get published year on year. The premise is helpful for me because I've been able to take time to read it and understand it. But if we can use it to inform how we support coaches, I think that's great. Because ultimately, it's coaches that need supporting with actual solutions built on coaching philosophies that make sense to them. That makes sense.
100%. I mean, there's so much about what you've said. It sounds like you've been on your own journey to figure out what you're thinking, almost sounding cognitive here, metacognition, right? You're thinking about your thinking, you're thinking about, it's there's so many things going through my mind as you're speaking. I'm thinking about, Professor Chris Cushion coming on and saying, well, there's little face validity here. There's face validity is a problem because you can get somebody who's underpinning their coaching if they're that way inclined from a cognitive perspective, and somebody with an ecological dynamics. But actually, when you look at the activities themselves, there's very little difference going on. Now, you could then argue, but what difference there is could actually make a difference, right? And so you can get into the weeds. So because I'm listening to you and I'm nodding away and I'm agreeing, and I think for all of us who really, really do like to think about this stuff and want to be the best that we can be, and we think about this, and so we dive into the academic side because we're saying, we want to understand it and we want to be better at it because we think if we understand it more, we'll have more tools on the table and we can be better for our players. The problem is the deeper we go, the more abstract it becomes. And that's what I'm hearing from you, is that we can go so deep into this stuff, but it just becomes further and further from what it's like at the coalface. And at the coalface, there's people who can't even begin to articulate some of this stuff. They have no interest in articulating some of this stuff, but are masterful at changing behavior and put on awesome sessions. I think why I love going in at a deeper level is, and I'm going to bring up a very basic example here. I just think sometimes it helps you to think about your thinking and ask questions and be critical. And boy, I would even bring up professional judgment and decision making, Ben, which I know might be counter to how you see it, but it just helps you think about what you're doing and critically analyze. And too often I see incredible coaches who are just really, really good at what they do, but then they get in a stuck pattern of thinking about how to do something. So, for example, the absolutely blindingly obvious one in soccer football is, which happens, I've been blessed to stand by the side of amazing Premier League pitches, and I'm at the end of a session, I'm watching a coach feed a ball from the goalposts to a striker who then gets a single touch and blazes it past the goalkeeper. And I'm like, I can see the value in doing this occasionally during a season, but it's literally every day. And the coach is feeding a ball from a position where the ball will probably never be fed from. And it's just little examples of that I think where we do go a bit more into the weeds and where we can go, yeah, that's not representative, or that doesn't have high specificity. And what attention or what cue is somebody paying attention to? What intentionality is there? Or again, trying to draw across different language, different ways of describing what we're doing across different theoretical underpinnings. But I just think that's what ecological dynamics and information processing and predictive processing and all these things do, is they help us to ask questions. And whilst there's some incredible coaches who would say, I don't want any of this, and they are brilliant at what they do anyway, by diving into some of these things, I just think they help us to ask questions about some of the stuck stuff that are out there. Does that make any sense back to you?
Absolutely. The ecological dynamics framework as a 19-year-old undergrad who I couldn't properly verbalize why I didn't like the coaching I was seeing or I'd experienced. It gave me a language to be able to explain the things I was trying to explain. Like it had real descriptive power in enabling me to talk about the problems I'm seeing. In it was all a lot of it was predicated on goalkeeper coaching, so that's kind of where I started. But it gave me a load of tools and ways of phrasing things that helped me solve the problems that I experienced in goalkeeper coaching. And having worked with goalkeeper coaches since, yeah, same thing. Some of the phrasings resonate really well. The notion of repetition without repetition. I repeat, get lots of reps of the things we're doing, but let's do it in circumstances that aren't exactly the same. And coach I was talking to then kind of reframe that as, so it's just like doing the event over and over again rather than the save over and over again. I was like, yeah, it's exactly that.
Yeah.
He just kind of
Yeah.
had his own phrasing of it, and then the support, the evidence underpinning ecological dynamics. He was then like, okay, yeah, okay, cool. Well, it's good to know that makes sense, and that that's actually an idea, and there's some support for it. So there's definitely value in that kind of reaffirming of things we're doing, or the challenging of some things we're doing which maybe don't fit within the framework. I just think ecological dynamics it's not the most accessible stuff in the world. Because it's the terminology can be quite jarring.
That what is the challenge? What is? Do you think that's the main challenge here? I mean, I think just to throw something at you, where I've been put off slightly by some of the arguments out there has just been at the extreme ends, right? It's like this is the way to do it, and this is the optimal way. And I'm sort of looking at various sport. I'll borrow from my own sport of golf, for example, where you have countless champions who have just stood there and beat balls all day long, and I don't think that's the best way to practice, but that's what they've done. They've tried to. They've had a lot of coaching, a lot of teaching, being told what to do, and some of them have had a lot of success that way. I'm just borrowing from one sport and through my lens of the world. Similarly, there's a lot of stuff out there. To come back to my Premier League example, that exists. Does it exist because it's stuck and nobody's quibbling about it, or is it stuck because it works for some people? So I think sometimes some of the messaging within ecological dynamics tends to be off-putting from the perspective of, no, you're wrong, we're right, this is how it is. So there's that. Obviously, as a sports psychologist, I'm slightly biased because I like mental skills training, and I feel that I've enjoyed helping players utilize mental skills, and I'm not too sure how much ecological dynamics supports that, although there always seems to be a bit of a linguistic work around these things whereby ecological dynamics say, no, you can do that, and you can do that, and you can do that. So I appreciate that. So those are just a couple of things, that bugbears that I've had. But what do you think are the main challenges towards ecology? The other thing, I suppose, is I think predictive processing is quite powerful. I think it's the idea that we maybe have a model and we generate solutions, and we actively infer what's going on around it, that kind of thing. We won't go too deep into that. I think that's quite pertinent as well. So yeah, I suppose last question today is, what are the challenges to this subject area?
I'm not averse to predictive processing. I'm on a paper that's under review on a predictive processing and decision making. So
nice.
Definitely, it's certainly a powerful framework as predictive processing. I guess, and I'm really mindful. Like, I'm not pointing. The only person I'm pointing fingers at is me, is because this is what I did. But like a little bit of knowledge is a really powerful thing, right? As kind of the saying goes, and that first little dip into ecological dynamics, like, it sounds cool. The same with like any kind of fringe theory, kind of sounds a bit different. Sounds quite cool. I'm using like the notion of affordances, like, I think is brilliant. But like, if you first see it, like, it sounds like I'm an affordance driven coach. You know what I mean? Like, so there are some of those bits and pieces of it which I think there's a tendency, I did this. ran before I could walk because I had a little bit of knowledge about ecological dynamics, and I then wanted to tell everyone about that little bit of knowledge I had and tell everyone that what they were doing was wrong because actually Renshaw 2011 says this, and like there's that sort of, that's the kind of the challenge that I see, because it's a challenge that, like, I was the problem. I was the person on Twitter back then preaching and getting into rows with everyone because I had this little bit of thing that I wanted to tell everyone about, and it's not until now I've barely scratched the surface, because I've shifted more towards ecological psychology because I'm a visual perception researcher, but in reality, I'm not even close to understanding the real depths of that as a theory, because um, I'm a cliche of myself. I come from a sport background. I can't do the mathematics required to calculate the vertical optical acceleration to then understand time to contact. Like I can't do the maths. I understand the theoretical tenets behind it, but it's so big.
Well, that's it, Ben, isn't it? And sorry to
Yeah.
interject, but I think, when I read Carl Friston and I read Andy Clark and I read Max Ramstad and these guys who are sort of trying to solve these problems, and I've thrown sort of 3 predictive processing guys at you, but um, they are reaching places I just can't reach, and what we basically know is we just don't really know how the brain works. They are just permanently hypothesizing how the brain works. It's my understanding these are the world's finest minds in this area. I think it's absolutely fascinating. But I think as coaches, we need to be really careful. Yes, we want to strive to have, some of us, not all of us, some of us want to have a theoretical orientation. But I really had to say to myself, because sometimes I write about the brain, but it's like I'm writing from a point of naivety. I have no idea how the brain works. Someone might come along tomorrow with a theory that blows everything else out of the water, and you go, okay, wow, we were all completely wrong. So it almost feels like we always have to come back to the behavioral level of, just trying to manage and develop behavior and skill and have a curious appreciation for how the brain works, but a humbleness that helps us understand it. Yeah, we don't know, because the best minds in the world don't know. I mean, that's just my thought, Ben.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And I guess to bring it around to ecological dynamics, I've kind of been almost a bit negative about it for parts of this. I'll get drummed out of the magic circle, but I think that's the power of ecological dynamics, is it takes such, like, ecological psychology and dynamic systems theory has such a depth of knowledge that underpins it, like crazy stuff that I'll never even get close to reading.
Yeah.
The power of ecological dynamics and the incredible work by people like Keith Davies, Dwight Rocco, Ian Renshaw,
Yeah.
more recently like Carl Woods, for example. The
Yeah.
incredible job they've done is to capture that in a framework that
Yes.
has real explanatory power for coaching practice.
Yes. Agreed.
That has some principles which, okay, we can debate the accessibility of some of the phrasings of them, but has some real power for on the ground practice, that has some real power for explaining how skilled behavior actually happens.
Yeah.
Like the constraints led approach, I think, is a really powerful explanatory tool to understand why the things we see in sport happen. I think nonlinear pedagogy it's not a pedagogy, but nonlinear pedagogy as a tool to design motor learning environments, to design practice environments, has such practical power because it has been able, they've been able to conceptualize a load of really complex ideas into some quite actionable components. I think
Agreed.
that's the quality of the framework. That's what was always attracted me to the framework,
Agreed.
and then allowed me to then go further, as we said, further into it, because I'm interested in understanding the mechanisms that underpin perception, action, cognition, etc.
Yeah. I completely agree, and I'd like to bring things to a close now, because I promised you we'd stick to 45, and we've gone 20 minutes beyond that, just because it's just an area that I think we're both keen practitioners to albeit you as a coach, me as a sports psych, to grapple with this area and I would absolutely add that I think some of the finest coaches utilize ecological dynamics. And to speak to your point as well, it's I think built in popularity because yes, there are some terms that feel at times unreachable. At the same time, it's been packaged quite neatly, which I think that could probably be quite scary for somebody who's into ecological dynamics, because it's all about complexity. It's like, we don't have systems and structures and frameworks, but it has been packaged quite neatly with constraints-led approach, NLP, non-linear pedagogy, that is, but within that, representative learning design, intentionality. It feels, and some of the threads I see on X by some coaches who are really trying to get into it, some of the threads are really, really good, and you can see how that can be something that you can grab hold of and be a very dynamic coach. And there were some wonderful coaches out there engaging in their coaching, utilizing ecological dynamics. So I think it's testament to, as you say, to the work of Keith and Ian and Carl and others. So brilliant. Ben, thank you so much, buddy.
No, thanks for having me. I've loved it. Really good fun.
How can people obviously now know you don't like to do X anymore, but how can people find you, follow you, and potentially get in touch?
I'm still on X. I'm still in the shadows. I'm
In
just
the
watching.
shadows. Nice.
Yeah, you can find me on X. My name I can't remember.
Ben Franks, probably.
Have to link it
Yeah,
somewhere.
no worries. We'll do it in the show notes. Brilliant. Ben, thank you so much for today.
Thanks, Dan.
Well, everyone, I really enjoyed that podcast episode, and I hope you did too. I'd love to hear what you think of the show. If you do have any suggestions, please do get in contact via X or Facebook or through my website, danabrahams.com, to tell me what you think. If you've got any suggestions, I'd be delighted to hear them. I'm already looking forward to next week's episode. Bye for now.